Hey, Polly.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm excited today because we have a very energetic and very well known. And no, I don't want to say that. That's
No.
wrong.
Energetic and
I
well-known.
was just like, oh,
Nope.
trying to do extra for when I don't need to. Hey, Polly.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah, so we got.
Today we have Jessica Lahey, critically acclaimed author, Jessica Lahey.
Oh,
Yeah, she's written The Gift of Failure and I might say this wrong, The Addiction Inoculation.
I think you got it.
All right, so she's going to be telling us all about that and a lot about the prevention work that she's doing in schools and with parents.
Excellent. I can't wait.
Yeah, so without further ado, joining us today on Totally Preventable, we have Jessica Lahey, author of The Gift of Failure and The Addiction Inoculation. Jess, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you so much.
Man, it is so good to have you on here. I'm so excited. We got a bunch of great questions for you, but as we like to do, we want to start off with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So, going way, way back. So I went to law school assuming I was going to work with kids in juvenile court. And in the middle of law school, I was asked to teach a class on law in a democratic society and fell completely in love with teaching and never looked back. I finished law school and went straight into teaching. Have taught every grade from 6th to 12th. And about this time, I started writing my first book, The Gift of Failure. I got sober. I had needed to get sober for a while. And I got sober. It's been 10 and a half years ago. And The Addiction Inoculation, as much as I love my first book, it's my baby. It's the first book, I put out there. My second book, The Addiction Inoculation, is really the book that I feel what is sort of my life's work. That it's what's made my story growing up in a home with an alcoholic and, all of the pain and damage that substance use disorder has done to my entire family going way back. It's the book that's made that all kind of worth it for me.
Well,
Nice.
first, congratulations on your sobriety.
Yes.
Thank you.
For sharing.
Thank you.
Yes. So your work focuses on education, parenting, and prevention.
Mhm.
You share maybe like what experiences in your life really pushed you more into that? You shared a little bit, but was there more?
Yeah, sort of. There's something, when I look at sort of what I do for a living, my job as I see it is sort of as a science writer. Like I take all this research, and whether it's about education, how kids learn, how the brain learns, and that is just advancing so quickly now, or what substances do to the adolescent brain and body, all that kind of stuff, and then translate it for people who don't feel the need to know every single tiny detail about all of that stuff. I could go on for hours about, the adolescent brain and stuff like that and how magical that transformation is that happens there. But, not everyone wants to hang out with me for 2 hours to talk about the intricacies of the adolescent brain. So, I feel I feel so fortunate that my job now as both a writer and as a speaker, which is what I do most of the time, is to take that research and translate it. And so when the Research Society on Alcohol gave me an award for the addiction inoculation, it was like for me to get an award from the scientists who do the research saying, what, you did a really good job translating this research for people who are non-scientists. That was like the biggest award. It's for me, it was better than a literary award because I think a lot of people who write about research are just petrified that we're getting something wrong, that somehow we misinterpreted a study. But that research I love the research process, and I love the process of translating research for people who want to actually use it in a way that is that will change their lives. So I feel so fortunate to have this job.
That is great. I often see reports and articles and documents and data, and it's predominantly in languages that I just cannot understand. I mean, it's just
Yeah, exactly.
I need it to be broken down. So learning that this is what you do, you take that research, you make it more bite-sized and more understandable for those who aren't in that field or aren't.
Well, and I'm also very, very lucky in that I'm married to a physician statistician who, analyzing statistics is a big part of his job. It was a big part of a master's degree that he got. My oldest is an economist, and very steeped in statistics and studies. So if I'm ever worried that I'm misreading something or I don't understand a statistical concept, I've got these sort of in-house experts. I'm very, very fortunate that way.
That is great. In your book, The Gift of Failure, you emphasize the importance of allowing children to fail. How can parents and educators strike a balance between supporting children and letting them experience failure?
Yeah, I think that for me, it all comes down to, how I'm modeling that for my kids first and foremost. I think, we can tell kids, oh, all I care about is that you learn from this, or, yeah, you made a mistake and, you screwed that up. But, what is most important to me is that you learn from this experience and that you can do differently next time, whether better or, whatever. And that starts with us modeling that, and that's both as parents and as teachers. It was really, what's fascinating to me is how much we want to be perceived as perfect, and how rarely we let people into the process of, oh wow, you know what, I screwed that up, I need to make an apology, I told you something. In fact, this used to happen in my classroom all the time. On the front of my plan book, I would keep an index card, always safety paper clipped to the front of my plan book. And every day, if there was something I needed to look up, had no problem telling my students, oh, you know what, I don't actually know the answer to that question, but I'm going to certainly find out. And I would write it down. And if I made a mistake, I still flash back to things I said slightly incorrectly, like 15, 20 years ago in my teaching. But I would always come back to the kids if I caught it and said, you know what, I said this, and I think I said it kind of incorrectly, and I apologize for that, and I want to clarify. And that's something that, I try to model for my kids too. And I think it's really important that people see, oh, okay, so we're doing the best we have with the information that we have right now. And if we learn how to do better, or we learn that we did something wrong, and maybe we can do better next time, that we do that, and that we show other people that that's okay.
Mm.
I think that's a great model. I think kids see right through when you're telling them something that you're not confident about and you're not really sure. I think they catch on to that and they lose faith in you.
I think
Yeah,
it's
I said, I recall, these things are things that like plague me in my brain. I said something incorrectly in a classroom, and I know it's one that I've not been able to apologize to all the students for. And I'm really worried that they're going to like go throughout their lives with this one small piece of incorrect information. And I just wish there was a way for me to get a message to every single one of those students and say, you probably don't even remember this, but I said this thing, and I don't want you to go through your lives, having, a teacher's parents were authority figures in a lot of ways. And especially for little kids, they tend to think, oh, like, they have to be right, especially, for really little kids. And I want my students to ask questions. I want them to challenge me if they think I'm wrong, and challenging me in the classroom over, if I'm being vague or if I'm incorrect, that makes me a better teacher. And that's really, really important to me in the way that I put that out there for others to see, for my students and my children to see.
refreshing
Yeah.
to hear someone say that, you know what, I don't know the answer, but I'll get back to you. There's so many people who would just rather make up an answer or act like they didn't hear the question and
Right.
move on. So it's refreshing to hear that people do that.
Yeah.
I can see.
It drives me bananas when an expert in one area gets a question in an interview, and they're not willing to just say, that's outside my wheelhouse. I don't know the answer to that, but here are some resources I really love about that. Or, I'd be happy to answer that as it pertains to my area of expertise, but you're talking about something that's outside my wheelhouse. I think, there's a lot of quote experts online right now, and I really wish that some of them were willing to delineate where their areas of expertise begin and end.
Mhm.
I just experienced that on a panel. I know what you mean.
With all the digital distractions going on and social media for young people, do you have any strategies to help parents foster resilience with their kids?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really cool about what I get to do is when I'm out talking to students in school. So usually when I go to a school, often when I go to a school, I'll talk to the kids during the day, and then I'll do professional development with the teachers in the afternoon, and then speak to the parent community in the evening. And often what I do, almost always what I do, is give all the kids my email address, and I ask them to tell me what they would like me to tell their parents that evening. And the biggest thing I get is I'm not my brother, I'm not my sister, I'm not you when you were my age, I'm not your do-over, that kind of thing. But another big one is, if I'm being told by my parent to do X, why don't they have to do it too? Like, if I'm being told to back off on using my phone or to get offline, and yet they're sitting there completely attached to their phone, how is that A, fair? As we know, kids tend to have, especially in certain age ranges, tend to have a really heightened sense of justice, and that just does not make sense to them. Also, as I went back and I said the word modeling before, we have to model what it is we want from our kids. So if we're constantly glued to our phone, then telling them to not be constantly glued to their phone is not going to have any effect whatsoever. If anything, it's just going to show us for the hypocrites that we often are. So that comment from kids of, the do as I say, not as I do thing, I'm really sensitive to that, because kids almost every single school visit, one kid will make a comment about that it doesn't seem right, or it doesn't seem fair, or it doesn't seem smart that parents are, I'll even get questions like, this one parent asked me once about how to get her kids to read for pleasure, because they stopped reading for pleasure because they're constantly playing video games. And my response to her was like, okay, well, we'll talk about some suggestions for books, but do you read for pleasure? Do your children see you read for pleasure? And her answer was no. I'm really busy. I have a very busy life, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, there's no advice I can give you if your kids don't see you prioritize reading for pleasure, or being off your phone, or getting outside, or exercising, or whatever that thing is that we want our kids to do. They're going to do as we do.
We've talked about that with underage drinking and kids, and when kids,
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
parents having wine o'clock all the time, or sneaking drinks into their kids' softball games or whatever. This is what your kids are seeing as their modeling, so.
Actually, can I comment on that for just a
Yeah,
second?
absolutely.
Because so I often am asked at talks around substance use prevention about, well, what if there's some wine there, because this is going to be just a challenging event. That idea that, oh, I am having a bad feeling, or I anticipate that I'm going to have a bad feeling, therefore I will drink at it. I will numb it. I will make it go away through alcohol. That's what they're seeing. That's what they're hearing. And I really worry about that messaging, because what we want in kids is for them to learn how to name their emotions, to deal with their emotions, to actually process their emotions, as opposed to just numbing them. And so if we're showing them that what we do is numb our emotions rather than learn to deal with them, then that's what they're going to take away from seeing us, drink or whatever it is we're doing to numb our emotions.
Very true.
Yeah.
I was going to say I was guilty before we got to the drinking part of it. But I'm very guilty for saying, screen time is done, and then I'm, checking my phone, I'm checking that email.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I get taken to school quite a bit by my kids, because both of my kids use social media a lot less than I do. My daughter in particular is not a fan of having her phone around. She loves it for taking pictures, and she'll check social media occasionally. But if we go out to dinner, inevitably she's the one who left her phone at home, not me or my husband. So this is a really wonderful situation in which I'm trying to be more like my daughter. I'm very proud of her for being disconnected from that, and wanting to have experiences that are actually in the moment, as opposed to, looking at other people's lives.
Mhm.
I have 3 young podcast listeners at home who love when our guests say something that they could use against me.
This might be one of
This
those
is definitely going to be one where I can say,
Yeah.
"Ooh, remember
Yeah,
what
well,
you
you
said?"
should see what it's like when you are the author of The Gift of Failure, or whatever, the addiction inoculation, and especially The Gift of Failure, though, because my kids throw it back on me all the time. Like, especially if I'm helping my youngest a little bit too much, my oldest is like, "Gift of Failure, mother does too much for her child." That kind of thing. It's awful.
Now, your work with in prevention programs is crucial. Can you share some strategies or approaches that you found effective in preventing substance misuse in young people?
Yeah, well, that's what's so cool. And okay, here we go. Ding, ding, ding. Substance use prevention is totally preventable, 100% totally preventable. So we know this. And so now the question is, what do we do with this? We know that substance use among adolescents has been in the decline for the past 15 years or so. I just recorded, I do these daily videos, or not as much daily anymore, but I do really regular videos on my Instagram Reels about all kinds of topics around either gift to failure, addiction, inoculation. And even with cannabis legalization, we now know, according to some research that came out just last week, that there isn't really a rise in in cannabis use among adolescents, even with legalization. So something is going in the right direction. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that we figured out that just say no and scared straight doesn't work. But what does work is substance use prevention from a very young age. And that does not mean we're talking to kindergartners about, crystal methamphetamine use. We're talking to them about, things that go inside the body and things that don't go inside the body, and why, that thing on the floor may look like candy, but you need to check with an adult before you put it in your mouth, or why we don't take medicines that don't have our name on the prescription label, that kind of thing. We know that giving kids really good information about what substances taken during adolescence, that substance use during adolescence and substance use in adulthood is very different. The younger a kid is when they first start using substances, the higher their lifelong likelihood of developing substance use disorder. From, if you start in 8th grade, you've got almost a 50% chance of developing substance use disorder over your lifetime. Wait 2 more years, it drops by half. Wait another 2 years, it drops by half again. That the things that substances do in the adolescent brain can have a very real and permanent, short-term and permanent effect on their brains over time. And then the way that we get to know, depending on how well we know our kids, we either do or don't know what their lifelong dreams and goals are. And we can use those things as levers to talk to them about things like, well, you want to be an architect? Well, man, architects have to have really good short-term memory. They have to be able to juggle priorities. And we know that, for example, using cannabis can affect the hippocampus, which is the seat of long-term memory formation and consolidation, and that it can not just have short-term impacts on that, but long-term impacts on that. And that can affect how well you do in school and your ability to go on and become an architect. So giving them really good information as opposed to, just trying to scare them, that's one of the biggest things we can do. And then just remembering that this is something that you develop along with your kid. Little kids, it's simple, and we're talking about, bodily autonomy and safety. And then as they get older and they start seeing things that spark conversations around substance use, that we go with those conversations and continue that all the way through until they're out of our house.
Mhm.
And beyond, we've been talking about
And beyond. Yeah.
beyond.
Yeah. And I'm almost didn't even put a college chapter in the addiction inoculation. But then when I started doing the research on, number one, how many people drink in college, how predictable it is, who will drink in college, what that looks like, why people either drink more or less in college, which is problematic and which is not, I couldn't believe the information I was learning. I had to sort of really change my thinking around drinking as a phenomenon on college campuses, and realize that there are very big levers that we can use to change substance use in college.
Yeah, we've been talking some about parents and their role in their college kids, because we've heard so many times, oh, I got them to 18, my job is done. And we're like, no.
I mean, 18 is great. 18 is fantastic. That's, I've got a 20-year-old and a 25-year-old. And I because I have substance use disorder and my kids are biologically related to me, my kids have an increased risk for substance use disorder. It's about genetics is about 50 to 60% of the risk picture. And then there's the epigenetic piece. But my kids are just at higher risk for substance use disorder, and for various reasons, not just genetics. I have a queer kid. I have, there's all kinds of things that change their risk factors. And so, my oldest is 25, and I continue to talk to him. He lives on a block in New York where there are 3 weed dispensaries on his block, and literally he could lower a basket out of his living room window to the dispensary downstairs if he wanted to, and pull the bucket back up with the weed in it. So, there's his whole block smells like weed. So we have a lot of conversations, not just about using, but about what the difference between use and sliding into that more dangerous territory, what that looks and feels like, because I've been there. And I just really don't want them to have to go down the road that I went down. And every bit of prevention that we do, it does dual purpose. This is what I think is so cool, is that getting to a place where you need help if you do have a problem with substances is like a 100-piece puzzle. And that 100th piece, the piece that makes you go, yeah, I need help, that's like a rare piece. You hardly ever get to be that piece. I was that piece one time for one person, and it was amazing. But I've been like piece 37 or piece 22 or piece 89, whatever. They all have to be there for piece 100 to come into place. And all this prevention stuff, those are all pieces. And I can't guarantee that just because I wrote a book on this and I'm following best practices, that my kids won't end up developing substance use disorder. But if they do, they're going to have a lot more pieces in place in their puzzle, and hopefully they can get to help a lot quicker than I did. So, it plays dual purpose. And, just because your kid does develop substance use disorder, that's not the end of the conversation. There's a lot more to talk about.
So your writings have been read and shared a lot. Is there one in particular that you think really is significant to a lot of your readers?
I was so fortunate. I got to write a column for 3 years called the Parent Teacher Conference at the New York Times, and it was so much fun because teachers would write into me and parents would write into me and say, these are the things we really want to talk about. And I think one of my favorite pieces I've ever written was the last piece that I ever wrote for that column. And it was about taking the long view on parenting and focusing more on the process and less on the end product. It's that idea that, what makes us great parents are not our responses to the everyday emergencies, the homework that gets left at home or the forgotten lunch or whatever. It's in those moments where you get to see your kid using their strategy that they developed in order to remember the homework, or get to practice on time, or make sure that they're leaving time in case there's traffic. Those kind of moments that may not look like they have anything to do with you are 100% because you let your kids feel the consequences of having made past mistakes, and helping them, supporting them while they come up with their own strategies for dealing with those mistakes. And those are the really amazing moments. And yet you have to kind of quietly clap to yourself, because otherwise it's like a big, oh, look what I did, look how I formed this wonderful human. It's a lot less showy than you would think. Those brilliant parenting moments sometimes are very private victories, but they're pretty great.
Yeah, I had one of those this morning, actually. No, yesterday.
Yay!
Yeah, it
Well,
was.
that's so exciting.
Yeah, just seeing
It was so private, I don't even know about it.
my oldest just there's been something, I'm not, because he listens, I'm not gonna embarrass.
Yeah, of course.
He's got a part of his daily routine that often gets forgotten, and
Right.
so
And he nailed it.
he's nailed it. He actually,
That's great.
he told me about the experience he had at school, and why he will now make sure that he does this, part of
Oh,
his
that's
routine.
fantastic.
So,
It's awesome.
and out loud, I was like, very good. I'm very proud of you. But
Yeah.
in my heart,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. There was a moment once with my 25-year-old where he he messed up, and it was, for what he was dealing with, it was a big mess up. It was going to affect whether or not he could do his summer job or not. And he screwed it up and decided not to tell us that he screwed it up, because he knew that we would have advice on how to fix that problem. but he really, really wanted to own it and fix it himself. And so about 2 weeks later, he said, remember that weekend that I was supposed to go off and do this thing? Well, I showed up on the wrong day and I had to figure out a way to make this work. And he did it and he solved it on his own. And the fact that it was important to him that he didn't tell us about his mistake because he wanted to be the one responsible for finding a solution on his own, my heart swelled with pride. It was fantastic.
It's just a great feeling. Great feeling.
Yeah.
In your work, you often emphasize the role of parenting and shaping a child's development. What do you believe are the most important aspects of effective parenting in today's society?
Yeah, so obviously all of us come at this question with our own baggage, our own bias. I was raised in a family with a lot of because I was raised by in a family with substance use disorder. There was a lot of like, oh, don't look over there, don't name that don't talk about that. No, 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 everything's great, everything's perfect. And I grew up with a real dislike for gaslighting and for not using the right words for things, for not having honesty around emotions and around what's going on in circumstances. And so, you know, parents want to shield kids. In fact, I was just giving a talk around substance use prevention. And one of the parents said, does this mean that I need to be honest with my kid about our family legacy of substance use disorder or mental health issues or whatever that thing is? And I'm like, absolutely, because that's how your kid makes informed decisions. My kid said very specifically one time that in his own head, he used the fact that he has a genetic predisposition for substance use disorder as one of those cons on his list for why he might not drink or why he might not use. And I want my kids to have all the information they need in order to make informed decisions. And I want to feel like, at least as much as possible, that I give them the benefit of the doubt for making good decisions. So we call things out for what they are in this house. We're very honest about our motivations and the reasoning behind things. When Christmas got blown up one year because my parent relapsed, Christmas got canceled. Well, we all it didn't turn out the way we were hoping it would, and it was a little traumatic for everybody. We didn't make up, pretty tied up with a little bow reasons for why that happened. We were very clear. And so my kids know, for example, what substance use disorder can do to a family, and giving them that information is. I also don't love euphemisms. I don't love, instead of saying this person died, saying they kicked the bucket, that kind of thing. I mean, obviously, as it's developmentally appropriate, but I'm a big fan of using the right words for things and being honest with kids as much as possible.
Mhm. So how do you inspire parents and educators to embrace new perspectives on failures and substance use and different things that they may see as failures?
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes the way I get parents or educators to listen has to do, it's like with teaching, you have to make the lessons relevant to the kid in order for them to hear it and to absorb it and to really incorporate it into their long-term memory. And so it's the same thing with adults. We have to make these lessons relevant to them. If I'm just talking about research and it's all sort of abstract, it's not going to hit. It's not going to be something that's going to change someone's behavior. So when I talk about the fact that when we use extrinsic motivators like grades and points and scores and paying kids for grades and trying to control their world and reading their emails and reading their texts and watching the portal at school and using, all of those sort of external, trying to affect kids' behavior with those external motivators, then what we do is we create a kid that's less involved in learning and less interested in learning and less creative and less invested in long-term stuff that we want them to do. That's, I have to explain to them that, or over parenting, for example, if you're a highly directive parent, when you do too much for your kids, it does not help them develop their ability to feel frustrated and deal with frustration. And that means they're a lot less likely to complete tasks that are a little bit challenging for them. And the problem there is that tasks that are a little bit challenging for kids are actually where some of the best learning lies. And so if you do too much for your kid here, then they are probably less able to benefit from tools I use in the classroom, like teaching using desirable difficulties and things like that. And so I want your kid to have the potential to be the best possible learner. And so if the way we parent our kids can affect how they learn in school and in life, I have to make that land. You know, certain things work really well and certain things don't. And when I say to things like, for example, parents who control their kids more heavily and sort of really clamp on the control, that those kids lie to their parents more often. I mean, that's pretty clear in the research, because kids, especially adolescents, need autonomy. They need their own space. They need stuff that's theirs. And if we control them too much, they'll start using deception in order to create spaces that are theirs. And those things land because parents don't want their kids lying to them. Parents want their kids to be really good learners. Parents want their kids to be able to feel frustrated and rely on themselves. So when I use those stories or that applications to those parents' everyday lives, it tends to land a little bit better.
Mm.
It tends to be heard. And my job essentially is, one of the things I pride myself in is that I'm pretty good at saying things that are challenging to hear, like who's at greater risk for substance use disorder. For example, divorce and separation is an adverse childhood experience that renders kids a little bit more likely to develop substance use disorder. And that's incredibly difficult to say and to get people to hear and think about it objectively as opposed to defensively, because that's a really common occurrence, divorce and separation or adoption or whatever. But my job is to help people hear things that are sometimes not comfortable, but are still important to hear.
Well, you're doing a great job today, because you just rang a bell for me. I don't want to say that I'm an overstepper as a parent.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it is difficult for me to see my children when they're frustrated. It's mainly with
Oh, yes.
mainly with
Yes.
homework. So when I see, someone struggling with, let's just say, a math problem, and I can see where it's wrong,
Yeah.
I can see where they're having trouble, I tend to want to nudge. I don't want to give answers, but I want to nudge.
Right.
So I probably am an overstepper, but I'm gonna say I'm not an overstepper. What are a few signs that parents may be getting too involved with their child's frustration?
Yeah. An easy one is using the pronoun we when it really should be his or her or their. It's not our college applications. It's not our SATs. It's not our French class. It's their French class. It's their college application. It's their college essay. It's their homework, not, and, with the homework, especially the math homework thing, think about this from the perspective of being a teacher. As a teacher, if a kid raises their hand in class and says, I don't understand this, if I just reteach it to them again, or worse, grab the pencil and say, let me just show you, that makes me an awful teacher, right? That's not helpful to them. What makes for a good teacher is someone who can help a child get there themselves, right? And to the homework piece, actually, I would love to point out that, homework is information for the teacher, right?
Mm.
Homework is information about what a kid can and can't do. So, what would be way better than taking over for a kid or telling them how to do it would be to either do one of a couple of things. Skip that one, come back to it, go back to two problems before that's really similar in format. How did you do that one? And will those rules also apply to this one? Or the skipping ahead thing often helps because they can, maybe they're just not seeing it in that problem, but they go to the next one. But if they're really, really, really stuck, then the very best possible thing you can do is have the kid write a note to the teacher about precisely what they could do and precisely where they got stuck and where they need help. Then when they hand in their homework, the teacher's like, oh, I can see exactly where this kid got stuck. That is helpful information for me. Homework is not meant to be framed. It's not supposed to be perfect. It is meant to be information for the student, and it's what's called formative. It is a kind of formative assessment. It's also about practice and repetition, but it's also a formative assessment, a low stakes, assessment that helps form the kid's understanding of what they know and don't know, and the teacher's understanding of what the kid knows and doesn't know. So just step back, take some breaths, realize this isn't your homework, this is their homework. And yay, I'm so glad that you know what to do with the quadratic formula, but your kid needs to know what to do with the quadratic formula. So if you can help them in a way that is guiding and supportive, as opposed to instructive or directive, go for it. But if you're instructive, directive, that kind of thing, you may want to just let the teacher have at it with your kid and have your kid write a little note.
I do believe that my son and his teacher are probably going to flag this as their favorite podcast. So dad will not be interfering with it.
I think I remember a story that you told that you helped with math homework and it was all wrong.
Three.
It's really
Three
funny.
of the five. It's 3 of the 5.
Yeah.
I got 2
Yeah.
right.
Well, that's really upsetting. But I remember also that I used to help I used to help high school seniors with their college essays, because I was an English teacher and I did this on the side to earn some extra money. And I was helping this one kid, and I just took a red pen and I circled 4 sentences and I said, "Your parents wrote these, didn't they?" And the kid was like, "Wow, you're good." And I said, "If you think I'm good, you should see what the people who read essays all day long for college acceptance, for admissions. It's so easy to clock when kids haven't written stuff themselves or when kids haven't done stuff themselves." I used to know this math teacher, and she would say, "This is crazy. I assigned this algebra homework, and yet this kid is using trigonometry to solve it. And we have not done any trigonometry yet. And I don't think this kid just happens to be really, really advanced on his own." It's really easy to tell when parents are helping, especially since that means for me as a teacher, I'm less able to know where my students are on any given day, because if someone else is doing their homework, or helping with stuff, especially like writing papers and stuff like that, I don't know who they think that's helping. It's certainly not helping their kid learn, and it's not helping me be a better teacher to your kid.
Stepping all in it today.
I was going to add that this is your child that's getting their doctorate in quantum physics.
Yeah, I have a kid who's just about to start a PhD program, and I couldn't begin to tell you what he does. And that's really good because, it's fun. Number one, anytime your kid can teach you about something, I'm like, look, tell me about it like I'm a toddler. Just explain what this paper is about like I'm a toddler. But at the same time, it's also kind of a relief when you realize that that your kid is learning on their own, that they're learning things and figuring things out, and you're released of that responsibility of being like the omniscient, all present, all knowing teacher of all the stuff. They're at a certain point, they got to figure that stuff out themselves, or with the help of the very capable people who are supposed to be their teachers.
That's right. Lesson learned.
You've written about the need to shift societal attitudes towards failure. How do we get communities on board with this?
I think we're in a really amazing space right now, in terms of, because the pushback I often get is, yeah, this is all well and good, but college applications, or but testing, or but whatever. One of the things that we were able to do when we moved, or the last time we moved from New Hampshire to Vermont, is I was able to find a public school for my kid that used standards-based assessment, as opposed to like a whole bunch, meaning like, instead of getting a report card that says, okay, English, B. Oh, okay, but I don't know what that B means. Like, what can my kid do? What can my kid not do? But a standards-based assessment is, here are the skills that your kid needs to know this year, and here's what your kid can and can't do. As a teacher, like, oh my gosh, I would kill to see report cards like that for my highly mobile students, because then if a kid comes in who is either in the foster care system, or in the, families in the military, or parents have to move a lot for whatever reason, kid comes to my classroom and I can look at their report card and say, oh, I see, this kid knows what a verb is, but doesn't know what a noun is, or whatever. That is fantastic. And also, as a parent, I can look at a report card, a standards-based assessment, and say, a standards-based report card and say, okay, well, here are the very real areas where my kid is lacking mastery. And if I'm going to get a tutor, or if we're going to go back and relearn this stuff or whatever, I mean, see, I just learned the word we. I just used the word we. If my child is going to go back and learn that stuff, at least I can see what parts of it. So, like, for example, when one of my kids did need a tutor in a very particular class, I was able to look at that report card and say, okay, these 8 skills she really is just not up to speed on, and can you help with those things? Whereas, like I said, with a B, I don't know what she does and doesn't know. So there's that. There's also, colleges are starting to look a little bit more at mastery, or there's mastery.org, which is a whole other story. But I'm really, really excited about the shift towards mastery or standards-based assessment, curricula, grading, report cards, that kind of thing, because I think it's more, it shows kids that what we care about is the learning and not just the end result of a grade. Because my answer, when a parent comes in or a kid comes in and says, why is this a B plus and not an A minus? I'm like, well, because your kid didn't know all of the material. And the big challenge is, and this question came up in this talk I was giving just last week, that means that we need to think a little bit differently about our assessment. So let's say a kid gets a C the first time they take a test, and we give them the option to retake it, and they work really, really hard, and they learn the stuff, and they come to extra help and all that, or they get a tutor or whatever the thing is. And next time the kid gets a 100, what should the kid's grade be? A lot of teachers would say, oh, well, I can only give them 50% of that grade, or I can only grade them up to an 85%. Well, the answer then is a little weird to me, because did that kid really know 100% of those skills? Or are you telling me that kid only knows 85% of the skills because they didn't learn them based on a fixed schedule that you had for, and it makes our jobs as teachers much more difficult sometimes. But we have to think about what our priority is. Is it nice, neat rows in our grade book? Is it the end result being a simple letter that we don't have to explain? Or are we really interested in the learning and having a conversation or having a narrative around, here are the skills your child actually knows, here's what they need to know, and here's what's lacking, and here's how we work on that going forward? Because I want kids to believe me when I say, okay, but what I care about is that you learned from this. And right now, kids mostly believe what we want to see are high grades, and not necessarily, they don't really care so much how we get there.
I can remember a couple instances when my kids were younger where metric system is sticking out as the big one, but one of my kids really struggled with that and just failed it. And
Yeah.
like, we're not going back and no one's gonna teach it to her. Like, what happens next year, or what happens
Yeah.
in the next chapter when you're still talking about metric system and she
Yeah.
still doesn't know it? Like,
Yeah.
she
That's
needs
really,
needs to accomplish that. So I still don't know.
yeah, it's that I see that happening a lot, especially, like I said, in highly mobile students, where they miss something one place and then just never get it again.
Right.
There are lots of, you'll talk to someone and say, when did you learn about X? And they're like, yeah, I either never learned about that, or I didn't get it the first time, and then we never came back to it. And like I said, there has to be some middle place between, helping every kid learn on their schedule and having an endpoint where we've got to close the grade book. But as a writer and as a teacher of writing and English, and I taught Latin as well, for writing, it's not like there's ever an endpoint. If I could go back and rewrite The Gift of Failure, I would change lots of things. I would, writing is an ongoing project. So in my class anyway, you can rewrite a paper as many times as you want until we're leaving at the end of the year, or grades have to close for a semester, just because that's an artificial construct someone else has imposed on us. But as far as I'm concerned, keep editing that paper, keep working towards, the best possible paper it can be. I think our thinking around learning versus grading has to change. Do we care about the learning, or do we care about the grading?
As I'm continuing to think about the metric system, we took it upon ourselves to try to teach it to her, and we made this giant wall with different sticky notes. I don't think she ever got it, but her younger brother, who's now 21, is like, we can just, if my GPS switches to metric or whatever, I'll be like, oh, 500 meters, what's that? And he's like, how do you not know this? And like, blurts
You know
it.
what was funny? I was humiliated by the fact that my metric system was really, really weak. So I switched my car over to kilometers per hour, which you can do. In fact, so I live in Burlington, Vermont, and when I go over the border into Canada, my car actually automatically switches over. Um, so I switched over to that. We have a thermometer in our house and I changed it to Celsius. I just had to immerse myself in it. And it was so embarrassing. I was like 50 years old and my husband has to use Celsius. He's a physician. So when he talks about like body temperature, he talks about Celsius. But it's really weird how you can know it in one realm and yet not get it in all the others. So I had to jump in with both feet and just switch everything in my house over to Celsius or kilometers per hour in order to
Your
get it.
oven. Switch your oven.
Yeah. Start using the other side of my ruler, the one that had the centimeters on it.
This is wild. You just struck two different emotions in me. I lived in Burlington for 3.5 years. Loved it.
Nice.
First place I ever lived where it got so cold, my car wouldn't start.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
learning a lot about Greg today.
And then the other thing, you struck fear in me when you said that you were a Latin teacher because it made me think of Mrs. Davis, my Latin 4 teacher. And oh my goodness, that
Oh, the trauma is real. I always warn people when I have this one talk I give where I use a little Latin lesson as sort of the example of teaching. Anyway, I don't want to bore you with it, but I'll often make the joke that I don't want to give anyone any flashbacks or anything like that. But lots and lots of people have really negative feelings about Latin. But I had a blast because I taught it in middle school and I taught it for 3 straight years. And all I had to do was get them to like Latin 2 honors in high school. So we did a lot of like etymology. And what's fascinating to me is I taught for 5 years in a drug and alcohol rehab for adolescents. And in this rehab were lots of kids who either had quit high school, had undiagnosed learning issues, and had been told they were stupid, just couldn't do it, that learning wasn't for them. And one of the games they loved the most in that classroom, it was always my fallback when I couldn't get anyone to pay attention, was an etymology Jeopardy game where I would say, like, a question would be something like, this household word is related to the word cielo for sky in Italian or Latin or whatever.
so how has your work on parenting, education, and prevention impacted your personal life and growth?
Oh my gosh, so much. So all of the research I did for the gift of failure around like how parenting and teaching styles affect capacity to learn and mindsets around learning and all that kind of stuff really changed what I did in my classroom. I did a lot more stepping back as the teacher and not being like sage on the stage, sort of expert at the front of the room. A lot more peer-to-peer teaching, a lot more project-based teaching, a lot more choice. I was giving my students a lot more choice, whether that's in reading or whatever details I could give them autonomy around and choice around. And same thing about my parenting. I think, I've always been the kind of parent who erred on the side of giving kids privacy and realizing especially how important privacy is for development, for human development. But also, I was doing a lot of stuff wrong too. And when I learned about, extrinsic motivators and why chore charts don't work and why paying kids for grades doesn't work and all that sort of stuff, I had to think. And, not paying kids in exchange for household duties because that's what we do as part of a family. We don't pay kids for chores because we do household duties or chores. I hate that word because we're a part of a family and we support each other. So a lot changed. And then actually, when I did the research for the addiction inoculation, things really changed because with my oldest, I was doing the best I could with the information I had. And some of that was myths and magical thinking around, what works and what doesn't work, like giving my kids sips at home when he's younger, sips of beer or wine is going to somehow magically help him be a moderate drinker. That's not true, by the way. None of that is true. It doesn't work. But I was doing the best I could based on that information. So then when I turned to my daughter and I was like, my younger kid, I was like, I did a lot with your big brother that was wrong. And I've learned to do better. And so some rules are going to change around this house. Parents that have a consistent and clear message of no, not until your brain is done developing. Those parents tend to have kids with A, healthier brains, and B, lower lifelong risk of substance use disorder. And so, whereas I may have let your brother have SIPs, that's just not what we're going to do with you, because for me to do anything other than what I know to be best practices is to say, yeah, I know how to do better, but it's just easier for me if I do it this way. So a lot has changed in our household.
That's interesting. I have 4 kids, and my oldest will tell you a lot changed between her and the youngest. So it's just learning. Yeah, you do the best you can
Right.
the first one, and then you learn.
And
So
speaking of modeling, that's all we could ever want from our kids, right? Is to show them that
mhm,
as parents, as adults, as human beings, we do the best that we can with the information we have. And if we find out that we can do better, we say a mea culpa and we move on, and we say, I'm going to try to do better moving forward. And that's all I could ever want from my kids, is to see that and say, oh, I don't have to get defensive. I don't have to get upset about the fact that I did something wrong. I could just learn from it and move forward. That's what I want for my kids more than almost anything else.
yeah. So do you have any goals or exciting future projects that you might want to share with us?
Yeah, I'm working on some research on emerging adulthood, and really supporting kids are supporting what we used to refer to as extended adults. We are extended adolescents. We used to refer to like the 19 to 30-year-olds as sort of, that adolescence just keeps getting longer and longer. Well, it has a name. It's called emerging adulthood, and it's really hard for them right now. And whether this ends up being a book, or whether this ends up being me learning a lot and sharing it through the videos I put up on my Instagram reels, or writing, blog posts about it over at jessicalahey.com. I'm not sure yet, but I'm learning a ton right now about that. I'm also, as someone who just loves to learn, I try to go to a conference each year that's in an area I'm unfamiliar with. So I'm about to head off to the Alcohol Policy Alliance conference in Washington, D.C., to learn more about regulation and policy around substances, why we do it, what the information behind it is all about. Is it effective? Does it do anything to help with prevention? I just feel like that's a hole in my knowledge base. And I'm, as someone who's very willing to say, yeah, that's outside my wheelhouse, I like rounding out my wheelhouse as much as possible. So I'm always learning about stuff, whether or not I end up going out there and writing about it.
Okay. Now, for those listening and watching, and that want to get copies of your book, or want to reach out to get you to speak, or just to follow you or get in contact with you, what's the best ways that we can contact?
Everything is at jessicalahey.com. There's a little thing for videos. There's almost 200 videos on substance use prevention, and around the same for gift of failure stuff. My speaking stuff is there, and yeah, you can always just get in touch with me through the contact form at my website. And yeah, I there's nothing I love more than getting to travel and go to schools and nonprofit organizations and community organizations and speak. So if you have any interest in bringing me to your school or your neighborhood, just let me know. And usually my schedule's up there too. So if you want to just kind of check me out when I'm in your neighborhood, come and do that as well.
That is
Awesome.
great.
It's been a pleasure. I've had a lot of fun.
This is
Oh, I've had so much fun. Thank you so much for having me on.
my pleasure. Our pleasure. I'm trying to do the
Yeah.
lead. I'm all messed up. I'm all messed up. Thank you so much, Jess, for being a guest.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a great day.
You too.